All right, guys, we're on chapter 2 of Death in Venice. Death in Venice. Our main character is Gustav Aschenbach. He actually starts this, obviously, in chapter 2. So, chapter 2 of Gustav Aschenbach. So, Gustav Aschenbach was the author of the lucid and mighty prose epic about the life of Frederick the Great of Prussia. He was a patient artist who had devoted so much time and diligence to weaving Maya, the crowded tapestry of a novel that gathers so many human destinies in the service of an idea. The creator of that powerful tale, A Wretched Man, which which showed an entire generation of grateful youths that ethical resoluteness is still possible even after a man has plumbed the utmost depths of knowledge. And last but not least, in exemplifying his mature works, the writer who had penned the passionate discourse Mind and Art, which, because of its logical strength and eloquent antithesis, had led serious critics to rank it with Schiller's Cogitations on Naive and Reflective Literature. Born in El, an administrative seat of the province of Silesia or Silesia, Aschenbach was the son of a senior judicial functionary. His forebears had been army officers, judges, bureaucrats, men who had led their austere and decently frugal lives serving king and state. A more inward spirituality had been embodied among them once, in the person of a clergyman in the previous generation. Swifter, more sensual blood had come into the family through the writer's mother, the daughter of a Bohemian orchestra conductor. It was from her that Aschenbach had inherited the foreign racial features of his exterior. The marriage of sober official punctiliousness with darker, more fiery impulses brought forth an artist, and this specific artist. Since his entire being was geared to fame, he proved to be, if not exactly precocious, then ripe and ready for the public at an early age, thanks to the lean and decisive quality of his personal voice. He had already made a name for himself when barely out of high school. Within another 10 years, he had learned to maintain his prestige and supervise his renown from his desk, to be kind and meaningful in letters that had to be terse, for many claims are made on a successful and trustworthy man. The 40-year-old, worn out by the strain and stress of his own writing, also had to cope with a daily load of mail bearing stamps from all over the world. With a talent as remote from the banal as it was from the eccentric, he had the knack of gaining both the faith of the broader public and the admiring and demanding sympathy of the more fastidious readers. In his adolescence, he had already been pushed on all sides to achieve extraordinary things, and so he had never known idleness, never known the carefree heedlessness of youth. Once around the age of 35, when he fell ill in Vienna, an astute observer made a comment about him at a social gathering. "You know, Aschenbach has always lived like this." The speaker made a tight fist with his left hand, "but never like this." And he let his open hand dangle comfortably from the arm of his chair. This remark was apt, and Aschenbach's stance was all the more valiant and ethical, for his nature was such that his anything but robust constitution was only called upon for constant exertion, but not truly born for it. Medical consultants had kept the boy out of school and insisted on private tutoring. He had grown up solitary without friends, and yet had been forced to realize early on that he was part of a lineage that had no shortage of talent, but lacked the physical basis for the fulfillment of talent. However, his favorite word was Durchalten, see it through. It's like in, I don't know, Russian? Oh, it's German. Durchalten, which means see it through. And he viewed his novel about Frederick the Great as nothing less than the apotheosis of this command, which struck him as the epitome of active virtue in the teeth of suffering. He also eagerly looked forward to growing old, for he had always believed that an artistry can be called truly great, universal, indeed truly admirable and honorable, only if it is fortunate enough to be characteristically fertile on all levels of human experience. Fertile. Charged by his talent with tasks that he wished to bear on his frail shoulders, and intent on going far, he so greatly needed discipline. And discipline, luckily, was an innate quality he had inherited from his father's side. At 40, at 50, an age at which others waste time, rhapsodize, and have no qualms about putting off their great plans, the early riser would start each day with torrents of cold water on his chest and back. Then, after placing a pair of tall wax candles in silver holders at the head of his manuscript, he would spend 2 or 3 fervently conscientious morning hours taping the strength gathered in sleep and sacrificing his energy to art. It was forgivable indeed. It betokened a genuine victory for his mortality when the uninitiated assumed that his works were the result of concentrated pressure in a long single breath. In reality, however, his Maya world, or the mammoth epic that unrolled the life of Frederick of Prussia, had been gradually built up in greatness, layer by layer, through small daily installments, as well as hundreds upon hundreds of individual spurts of inspiration. And each work was so excellent, both as a whole and in every detail, because its creator exerted the same persistence and tenacity with which Frederick had conquered Aschenbach's native province. The writer had endured years of stressful absorption in one and the same work, devoting only his strongest and worthiest hours to its actual composition. I feel like Thomas Mann might be talking about himself, huh? For an important product of the intellect to make a wide and deep impact on the spot, a secret kinship, indeed a congruence, must exist between the personal destiny of the author and the overall destiny of his generation. People do not know why they grant fame to a given work of art. Far from being connoisseurs, they believe they can justify so much sympathy by pinpointing 100 virtues, but the real basis of their acclaim is an imponderable, a non-rational bond. Once in an inconspicuous place, Aschenbach had stated outright that almost every great opus that exists has come into existence despite everything, despite grief and torment, poverty, abandonment, physical weakness, vice, passion, and a thousand other hindrances. But that was more than an observation, it was his own experience. It was quite simply the formula for his life and his fame, the key to his over. So was it any wonder that it was also the ethical nature, the outer conduct of his most peculiar dramatis personae? So was it any wonder that it was also the ethical nature, the outer conduct of his most peculiar dramatis personae? I want to highlight that. So Aschenbach had stated outright that almost every great opus that exists has come into existence despite everything, despite grief, torment, poverty, abandonment, physical weakness, vice, passion, and a thousand other hindrances. So he said this in an inconspicuous place. So out loud, pretty much. The new type of hero favored by this writer and recurring in a variety of his characterizations had been analyzed quite early on. A shrewd critic had explained that this protagonist was the embodiment of an intellectual and adolescent manliness that, in proud modesty, clenches its teeth and calmly stands there while its flesh is skewered by swords and spears. That was sharp, glorious, and exact, despite the plainly far too passive image. After all, confronting destiny, maintaining grace under torture, these do not betoken merely passive endurance. They are active achievement, positive triumph, and the figure of Saint Sebastian is the finest symbol, if not of art as a whole, then certainly of the art under discussion here. Anyone who looked at this narrative world saw a number of features in it. He saw the elegant self-possession with which an inner undermining, a biological decay, is concealed from the eyes of the world until the very last moment. He saw the sallow and thoroughly unappealing ugliness that can fan the smoldering in its breast into a pure flame. That can even come to the rule kingdom of beauty. That can even come to the rule the kingdom of beauty. He saw the pale impotence that reaches in the glowing depths of the mind and draws forth the strength to hurl an entire arrogant nation to the foot of the cross, to the feet of that impotence itself. He saw the gracious stance in the empty and rigorous service to form the false and dangerous life, the swiftly enervating lust and art of born deceiver. If anyone contemplated all these destinies and so many like them in this narrative world, he could doubt the existence of any heroism but that of weakness. And yet, what other kind of heroism would be more suitable to these times? Gustav Aschenbach was the literary spokesman for all those who labor on the verge of exhaustion, those who are overburdened, already ground down, barely managing to stay upright, all those moralists of accomplishment who, puny of body and chary of means, husband their resources and apply exaltation of the will so that they may attain, at least for a while, the effects of greatness. There are many such people. They are the heroes of the age, and they all recognize themselves in Aschenbach's writings. They felt validated, celebrated, glorified. They were grateful to him. They proclaimed his name. He had been young and raw with the times and ill-advised by them. He had stumbled publicly and made false moves, compromised himself, flouted tact and common sense in both words and works. But he had then gained the dignity that he asserted every great talent has an innate urge and impulse to achieve. In fact, one may say that his entire development Abandoning all constraints caused by doubt and irony was nothing but a deliberate and defiant rise to this dignity. Lively and tangible depictions with no intellectual demands are the delight of the bourgeois masses, but the younger generation, passionate and unconditional, was fascinated only by problems, and Aschenbach had been as problematic, as unconditional as any adolescent. He had been a thrall to intellect, depleted the soil through overanalysis, ground up seed grain, divulged secrets, impugned talent, betrayed and exposed art. Yes, even while his opuses diverted, elevated, and animated his credulous followers, he, the young artist, had kept the 20-year-olds on tenterhooks with his cynicism about the questionable nature of art and the artistic life. Yet apparently a noble and proficient mind is dulled by nothing so swiftly and thoroughly as a sharp and bitter prod of knowledge, and it is certain that the adolescent's most melancholy and most conscientious thoroughness is shallow compared with the profound resoluteness of the adult master who resolves to deny knowledge, to reject it, to transcend it with his head held high insofar as knowledge is capable of even slightly paralyzing, discouraging, degrading willpower, action, emotion, and even passion. How else can we interpret the famous story, A Wretched Man, than as an outburst of disgust at the indecent psychologizing of our time, embodied in a silly, spineless rascal who fraudulently obtains a fate of sorts? Powerless, vice-ridden, and rather feckless in his ethics, he drives his wife into the arms of a beardless youth and then exploits his intellectual profundity as a rationale for committing sordid indignities. The weight of words vilifying the vile ushered in the writer's rejection of any moral skepticism, any sympathy with the abyss, and they heralded his renunciation of the leniency summed up in the compassionate homily: to understand everything is to forgive everything. What was being prepared, indeed carried out here, was the miraculous rebirth of naivete, and a short time later this miracle was explicitly discussed in one of the author's dialogues, though not without a certain mysterious intonation. Strange interconnections. Did this rebirth, this new rigor and dignity, bear the intellectual responsibility for a simultaneous development that others observed in Aschenbach? People now noticed an almost excessive strengthening of his aesthetic sense, an aristocratic purity, simplicity, and harmony of form, which henceforth lent his works an obvious, indeed a calculated stamp of mastery and classism. Classicism. But if moral resoluteness transcends knowledge, transcends the hampering and disintegrative force of cognizance, then does not such tenacity simplify the world and the psyche, dumbing them ethically while simplistically strengthening the wicked, the forbidden, the ethically impossible? And does not form have two faces? Is it not both ethical and unethical at once? Ethical as a result and expression of discipline, yet unethical, even anti-ethical insofar as by its very nature it is indifferent to all morality, indeed sedulously strives to make morality bow to form's proud and sovereign scepter. Be that as it may, development is destiny, and if it is accompanied by the sympathy, the mass confidence of the general public, then shouldn't it run a different course than the kind that proceeds without the glamour and obligations of fame? It is only the eternal bohemians who are bored and sarcastic when a great talent outgrows its libertine cocoon. The genius then becomes accustomed to representing and expressing the dignity of the mind, and he adopts courtly manners to conceal the pains he suffered in isolation, the harsh struggles he waged on his own and with no counsel until he finally attained power and honor in society. Incidentally, when talent shapes itself, how playful it is, how defiant and enjoyable. With time, there was something official and didactic about what Gustav Aschenbach had to offer. In later years, his style lost its unabashed boldness, its fresh and subtle shadings. It became fixed and exemplary, glib and conventional, conservative, formalistic, even formulaic. And as tradition tells us about Louis XIV, the aging writer expunged every common word from his diction. It was at this point that the educational authorities began including selected pages from his works in the assigned readers. He also found it appropriate and did not refuse when a German prince, who had only just mounted the throne, knighted the author of Frederick the Great on his 50th birthday. After several years of wandering, of trying out various places, he chose Munich as his permanent residence, living there in middle class honor and enjoying the prestige that is awarded the intellect in certain special cases. At an early age, he married a girl from an academic family, but she passed away after a short period of bliss. He had been left with a daughter who was now married. He had never had a son. Gustav Gustav von Aschenbach was somewhat below medium height, dark and clean shaven. His head looked a bit too large for his almost delicate physique. His hair brushed back, thinning at the part, very thick and fairly gray at the temples, framed a high forehead so rugged that it looked scarred. His rimless gold spectacles cut into the root of his fleshy nose with its aristocratic curve. His lips were large, often slack, often unexpectedly narrow and clenched. His cheeks were lean and furrowed. The well-shaped chin had a soft cleft. Major destinies seemed to have swept across his head, major destinies seemed to have swept across this head, which was usually tilted at a doleful angle. And yet it was art that had thoroughly molded these features, a labor normally performed by a hard and turbulent life. From behind that forehead had come the sparkling, rapid-fire dialogues between Voltaire and King Frederick on the topic of war. Those tired eyes peering deeply through the lenses had seen the gory inferno in the field hospitals of the 7 Years' War. But even on a personal level, art is, after all, a more sublime life. It delights more deeply, it consumes more swiftly, it carves the traces of imaginary, intellectual adventures into the features of its servant, and despite the monastic stillness of his outward life, it eventually brings about a fussiness, an over refinement, a weariness and nervous curiosity such as can scarcely evolve from a lifetime of dissolute passions and pleasures. Man. Thomas Mann, bro. Thomas Mann. Uh, I feel like he's talking about himself. I don't know. Death in Venice. Death in Venice. Death in Venice. So someone's obviously gonna die, right? I don't know if it's like a spiritual death or an actual bodily death, but I have a feeling maybe he's gonna have some sort of a crazy fanatic. He keeps talking about being a great author, great artist. Talks about being fame, having fame. I don't know. We'll see.